Alright guys, so I've been thinking a lot lately, and this is good information on, that's new information that you have never ever heard before, dot connecting from different people in my own experiences in my own little brain on what's going on with hormesis, sunlight, cold therapy, fasting, plus transcendental meditation. Why is those three forms of stress, good stress, and transcendental meditation all do the same thing, which is they ubercharge the hormones inside your blood system, and ubercharge your hormones, serotonin, dopamine, and GABA, and all these kind of things. So let's look. They're also all connected to light, by the way. So we've got cold therapy and fasting. What they do is they majorly lower the metabolic rate, the rate at which you consume oxygen, and they're both very powerful in that way. Fasting really does lower your metabolic rate, kind of like a good stressors, right? It tells the body, oh shit, it's crazy stuff. So in that stress, the mitochondria from cold hitting the body, the cold therapy, and the fasting, the mitochondria is forced to adapt and to grow, and this mitochondrial biogenesis, more mitochondria is created, but also the mitochondria is forced to give off heat, right? To create heat, because the fasting and the lower metabolic rate from fasting, the lower metabolic rate from the cold therapy cools the body. You know, that's why you feel cold when you fast. When you're obviously cold therapy makes you cold. So that the mitochondria is forced to go stronger, to create more mitochondria, and to give off heat. And the mitochondria gives off heat in the form of infrared light. Right, so the mitochondria gives off infrared light. Now we're always giving off infrared light, but more so when we are really fucking healthy, and more so when we're undergoing hormesis of fasting and cold therapy. The body is forced to generate its own heat, and it does that by giving off, the mitochondria literally gives off infrared light, which expels from the body. But in the process of being expelled from the body, the infrared light hits the waters within, your blood network, your lymph, and all that stuff. And it turns it into Jared Pollock's fourth phase of water. So now you've got stronger, tighter, more tightly structured Jared Pollock's fourth phase of water from fasting and from cold therapy, which is great. Your body always has structured water, Jared Pollock's fourth stage structured water. Your cells require it, the water in your cells, everything requires it, but you just get super tightly structured. You'd be surprised how much difference you get in structured water. But here's the key. That infrared light that's given off by the mitochondria hits the blood. Yes, it makes the structure more tight, but also inside the blood networks we have precursors to hormones like dopamine, serotonin, and GABA, and acetylcholine. These neurotransmitters, these precursors are L-dopa for dopamine, there's tyrosine, and tryptophan for serotonin, which converts to melatonin. So the precursors for all these hormones are found in the blood, and they get activated by infrared light. So as soon as the infrared light from the mitochondria, it's giving off lots of heat now because the hormesis it's under, hits the blood, creates the Jared Pollock structured water. The infrared light, what it does is it breaks the bond within the precursor of tryptophan and tyrosine, and then it makes it easier now for the conversion of those into dopamine and serotonin, thus ubercharging serotonin and dopamine. So once those precursor bonds have been broken, they go into their relevant organs of the brain, where the dopamine's made. The brain's made predominantly, and the dopamine's made in the brain, because the blood gets to the brain, and it bit in the kidneys, and the serotonin's made predominantly in the gut, and a little bit in the brain. So yes, and then it kind of ubercharges, and therefore, whoosh, you now have a lot of serotonin and dopamine flooding your system. There's two examples from fasting and from cold therapy, and it's through light, ironically. And also, transcendental meditation too does the same thing, because transcendental meditation, or any meditation, but especially transcendental meditation, is very powerful. It really does lower the metabolic rate very fast. It's the fourth state of consciousness, very deep meditative state, another state of consciousness, not waking, sleeping, or dreaming, but that lowers the metabolic rate very severely. You'll know this because you feel really cold when you do your transcendental meditation, when you get to 15-20 minutes in. And what that's doing is also doing the same thing. It's forcing the mitochondria to generate heat, because of the mild stress, and then boom, infrared light into the blood where the precursors to the hormones are, and then the brokes get bonded, the bonds, the amine bonds between the proteins get broken, and then it goes into the relevant orders and creates ubercharges serotonin and dopamine by that make. And then so it's all light, it's all linked in with light, infrared light, but also simultaneously that's infrared light, right? And to add on to that, obviously you can use externally, either from a machine or from sunrise sunset, infrared light that comes in from the sun to come in from, instead of from creating it from within by hormesis of fasting, transcendental meditation, or fasting, transcendental meditation, cold therapy, you can use the sun and let it come in externally, the infrared light, and that would do the same thing, because infrared light penetrates deep. It's not like on the surface layers, it penetrates deep, and that hits the blood. And as soon as it hits the blood, it does the same thing, right? So you can use the sun as a very powerful healing modality, or you can use hormesis from cold therapy, fasting, or you can do all of them at once. It makes it beautiful. That's one spectrum of light, infrared light. But then on the other hand, there's another spectrum of light called UV light, which is found in the midday sun. And UV light works in a different way, but a very clever way. UVA, which is found close to midday, and then especially high at midday, but really 1 or 2 hours after sunrise starts kicking in. UVA, what it does is it induces nitric oxide. It activates nitric oxide to dilate the blood vessels, and that's for a reason. It lowers blood pressure, but it also dilates the blood vessels so that now blood is pulled to the surface of the skin. There is blood, lots of blood, 1/10 of a millimeter to the surface of the skin, and you can just prick your finger with a pin very slightly and it'll start bleeding. That's proof. And the way that UV light penetrates into the blood, because it's very short wavelength, it can't penetrate deep. The way it does that is the UVA dilates the blood vessels through nitric oxide, so the blood is pulled to the surface of the skin, and then the UVA and UVB can penetrate from that very, very small depth and get into the bloodstream and irradiate the bloodstream. And that's key, because as soon as UVA irradiates the bloodstream, we've got the hormones, the precursors, and the same mechanisms I described for the other healing modalities. We've got tryptophan and tyrosine for dopamine, serotonin in the blood, and they get irradiated with UV, which is a very short penetrating wavelength that hits it, and that breaks apart the bond. It's just as infrared light breaks apart the bonds and creates from tyrosine, dopamine, serotonin, and dopamine. The same. Infrared light does it, but so does UV light, and it gets into the blood. It breaks that bond apart, and now they go to the relevant organs of the brain, the kidneys, and they start creating uber amounts of dopamine and serotonin. You get high. So, in conclusion, it's all hormesis, cold therapy, fasting, transcendental meditation, which all lower the lower metabolic rate, make you live longer when you lower metabolic rate, and they create infrared light within the body, which lights up, infrared light lights up and charges up the hormones. So that's just all of these modalities have use infrared light, and then the other from the sun. And you can also use the sun, obviously, and get your source. You can do both. It all comes down to light, isn't it? It all comes down to light. And then there's the UV midday sun, which does the same thing, which it's another form of light at the opposite side of the spectrum, at the midday sun versus the sunrise sunset sun. Sunrise sunset predominantly infrared, midday sun UVB, and it all does the same thing. UVB and infrared, all suns, all light forms, all hormesises ubercharge the system and give you high hormones. So I hope that made sense to you as I came through to that information. Never seen anyone say that before. I've connected the dots from Matt Roos' work, so hope you got some value. If you understand, hit me up with any questions. Peace.